Okay, sorry about the mess in here, and sorry about how much my voice echoes off of that wall. I'm gonna figure something out. I'm gonna put some acoustic foam on that wall, maybe, and that might do it. I don't know. Bad audio environment. Just my workbench here, right? I recently cleared out the projector. Thank you very much to the person who got it from me, and it can now live in their space instead of mine. Promptly replaced it with the Niska card printer, which I have not gotten working yet. I'm gonna make a video about this if I get it working, but I feel like every time I go back to fiddling with it, the probability that I end up just recycling it gets higher and higher. It's really old. It's really old and it's scuzzy. The manufacturer, Niska, Japanese manufacturer, they won't even admit that this model exists anymore. It is completely purged from their website. I don't think I can find drivers for it. I'm having a hard time even getting SCSI to work like at all. Like I don't own an old enough computer to easily be able to do SCSI. So I've been trying to get it going with the tough book, but the tough book is like turning out to actually be too new. I've been trying with Windows XP. I think I may actually need to go back to NT4, which is the newest version of Windows that this was supported on, as well as the newest version of Windows NT, I should say, that the SCSI controller I have was supported on. It's a whole it's a whole hassle. I just don't know that I'm enough of a retro computing enthusiast to want to get NT4 or 2000. I think 2000 might work as well. But to get one of those they like barely had hardware abstraction before XP. It was a huge pain. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that. Let's talk about what I was going to tell you about today. I spend a lot of time looking at eBay and a lot of time looking at AliExpress for like access control, physical security, intrusion alarm, that kind of stuff. I'm trying really hard not to become like a burglar alarm collector because I don't have a big enough garage for it, which is to say that I don't have a garage at all. Um, but someone asked in like a mailing list that I'm in a really specific question, and I was looking around, like, I bet there's some really cheap device that would do what you want. And the answer is that yes, there's a ton. On both AliExpress and eBay, there's a lot of Chinese made devices that I think would meet this person's use case. Now, they ended up figuring something else out, but I had just like fallen in love with some of these cheap telephone and alarm related devices I had found, and I just had to try one. So, what I ended up ordering, just for my own entertainment basically, is the Tiger 911. Now, I specifically bought this particular item because on the eBay listing, the speaker, which is labeled speaker, and I love when they label that kind of thing, was spelled wrong. And it was spelled wrong in a way that I found very, very funny. So naturally, I ordered it. Imagine my dismay when the item arrived and I discovered that someone must have told them they fixed the spelling. It's correct on the actual device. But you know what? We're going to take a look at it anyway. Let me give you a little bit of a preface. The description on it was really bad, and so I was not like 100% sure what I was ordering. I thought that this was going to be a 4 zone, basically like a really simple intrusion alarm. Like it's got 4 inputs, and if any of them are violated when it's on, then it calls a phone number. What I found out when I got it is that it's actually the other way around. It has 1 input, and if anything triggers it, it calls 4 phone numbers. So the E1 through E4 buttons and lights, those are referring to like contacts, not to inputs. Who knew? So it's less of a burglar alarm and it's more of an autodialer. There's like, it's kind of a gray area between those two categories, right? What's a burglar alarm? What's an autodialer? This is a little more like a cheap version of a sensaphone, for example, was like a really common brand of devices. They were very frequently used for cold storage. So if you've got like a business where you've got a freezer, And, you know, if the freezer fails, then like you could be out a lot of money worth of inventory. You could hook up a sensophone with a temperature probe in the freezer, and if the temperature ever went above a certain level, the sensophone would start calling phone numbers. And it would just call them over and over and over again until someone picked up and acknowledged. That way you'd know. Similarly, people would use them with like vacation homes. The opposite, to see if the temperature went below freezing because you don't want to lose your plumbing, right? And then find out like 3 months later. Um, so this is kind of that sort of thing, but it doesn't take a thermocouple input like the sensophones do. It just takes like a it's a little we'll talk about it. I'm a little confused actually about what kinds of inputs this takes, but it definitely takes just a voltage trigger. And then it calls phone numbers. This was very cheap. And I actually paid kind of out the nose for it because I wanted one shipping from the US because I was impatient. I think I paid like $25 for it, which was a little, I think you can find it for like half of that if you, are going to take shipping from China and just be more patient. Um, and I find these kind of interesting because I think these are on the way out, right? This is like fundamentally a landline telephone oriented device. And the days of landline telephones being ubiquitous are certainly fading away, if not gone, in the United States. And I don't think that this device was really intended to be marketed to the English speaking world, judging by how bad the English materials are. I but I don't know where it would sell, right? Because most countries that how would I put this? Most countries that underwent rapid industrial development after the United States did or are right now have even less landline telephony than we do, right? Because ultimately, cellular was cheaper to build out to cover like a large number of customers than copper service. So if you look at like most developing countries, everyone has cell phones, and there's not much interest in landline phones. They're like a more expensive option. Is that true of China? I really don't know. I could imagine that maybe in major cities in China, landline service is really cheap. But I think a lot of the world is in the same boat that we're really in the United States now, where landline phone service is often actually like a more expensive option than cellular. So this kind of cheap autodialer device, I don't really know who would want it at this point. It doesn't compete well with something that has a cellular connection or uses IP, which is, maybe not as great for reliability, but it's just more practical for most people. So call this maybe the trail end of kind of a dying bit of technology. That's enough preamble, I think. Let's go to the top-down view of my hastily assembled telephone test lab, and we are going to try it out. Okay, it's me in the lab. So I have not attempted to use this yet. I've not applied power to it. So you're going to go on this journey of discovery with me. But literally the moment that I took it out of the package that it came in, I realized that the keypad was a little funky. Most of these felt really tactile, but specifically the 5 and 8, and I think maybe the 0, there was like no tactile response. And so I was kind of bummed, like, is this thing really, defective out of the box? Well, it turns out the problem's kind of funny. The inside, obviously this is really simple how it's put together. There's just one board in there, and it's screwed to standoffs that hold it back from the front panel, and the like tolerances aren't quite right there, so it was actually just pushed too hard against this front membrane and was holding the buttons down continuously. So all I had to do was just loosen the screws that held the board to those stand downs. Seems to be fixed. I'm sure that whoever, bought this and didn't figure that out would have been pretty frustrated. It also came with this manual. This manual is a little bit... Several things about this are interesting. PSTN Autodialer, microcomputer auto alarm dialer, Tiger 911 series. You'll notice this illustration also has speaker spelled right, so it's like just the photo that they're using to sell it now that has it spelled wrong, which is kind of funny because that's like the worst place to spell it wrong, right? First thing to know about this manual, one, two, flip it over. This is the continuation. Open it up. This is the continuation, and then this, I don't know, it's just the page order is weird, right? I don't know, maybe this is like a conventional, well, that's the thing. I was about to say this is a conventional page order in Japan, but that would go this way, not like that. I don't, my guess is that it's just a printing mistake. Like, we've all done this, right? When you lay out like a multi-page thing that you're gonna fold and then you print it and you're like, oh, whoops, didn't think that out right. I think that's probably what happened here. But I looked to this manual to figure out how to set it up, and this manual is it's a little tricky. So this like breakout diagram of what's what has 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 just hanging off the side. That refers to the wires that are just hanging out of the bottom, which is a fun design detail. Like, I don't think that there's any way to install this that will look tidy. It is always going to look like a mess because of these wires just hanging out the bottom. You could pretty easily modify it so that they came out the back, and that would, I mean, honestly, I think it would look pretty much fine once you did that. I mean, not high end, but this is the only part of it that's like, I think, obviously cheap looking. So it tells us, number 5, 2 green color wire as telephone line output to connect with telephone, positive and negative are same. 6, 2 blue color wire as telephone line external line input, positive and negative are same. Now, if you've read my kind of recent blog post about telephone wall cords, you'll know that this assertion that positive and negative are they spelled it wrong. I'm going to say it that way every time. I find it funny. You would know that this assertion that positive and negative are same has kind of a complicated like bit of nuance to it, which makes me want to complain. But like whatever, it's fine. Like 99% of the time, the difference doesn't matter, so it's okay. Whatever, it's fine. It doesn't matter. It annoys me a little bit that they used 2 wires of the same color for each of the phone pairs, so even if we decided we really want to care, we don't know which one's supposed to be tip and which one's supposed to be ring. Red wire as power positive electrode. Flip it over. Black wire as power negative electrode. That's all simple enough. Earlier up it tells us operating voltage is 10 to 15 volts. That's basically what we would have guessed, right? 10 milliamp static current, 30 milliamp operating current, so this doesn't need a whole lot. Here's where I get confused. Up in the electrical characteristic, it says triggering mode, NC, NO, and voltage signal, 3 selectable triggering dialing alarm means. And if we look here, it says 8 and 9. Signal triggering line, regardless electrodes while connected to NO or NC joint. While used for 12 volt voltage input, wire yellow cable to positive voltage. I only have a yellow wire. The fact that it says 8 and 9 makes me feel like maybe there should be 2 wires, and that would make a lot more sense with the normally open or normally closed. So I don't know. I think what's going on here, there are multiple versions of this. I think, and this manual covers like all the versions because there's a 4 phone number version and an 8 phone number version. This manual applies to either. I think that similarly, there's a version that's for a dry contact input, and there's a version that's for a voltage trigger input. And I think just by chance, I bought the voltage trigger version because I've only got 1 wire, right? So I just don't know how I would set it up as normally open or normally closed unless I put that input relay or whatever between this wire and the positive power input. But then I'm just using it as a voltage trigger. Maybe that's just strictly like they're saying this supports NO or NC, just to tell you that, like, it is possible to wire it that way. That might make sense. But there's no, one of the weird things about this manual, maybe I'm being way too pedantic and no one cares about the manual, we'll just start messing with it in a minute, but there's no wiring diagram in this manual, which really surprised me. That seems like, given that they give you this whole reference table of how to configure it, it's weird that they don't give you a wiring diagram, which would have made it a lot clearer what they mean when they say regardless electrodes will connect to NO or NC joint, which I assume just means the polarity doesn't matter, but then if you're doing that from its own 12-volt supply, the polarity kind of does matter. Let's not worry about it too much. Let's just turn this thing on. Okay, well that was some pleasant beeping. I think the manual even tells us that it's going to beep several times for a self-test. So let's look at these instructions. Enter self-testing after starts up, and then enter working state. Decimal point on the lower right corner of LED monitor flashes. If alarm information is saved, Autodialer will make alarm as soon as receive alarm signal. If user wants to program or update set, please preset and inquire phone numbers, code password, record, and play record on the following steps. Okay, what does any of that mean? So I think they're just telling us that the programming is non-volatile, so like it doesn't need to be programmed every time you power it up. If it's already programmed, it's just working now. This is not programmed though, so we've got to go through the steps. That means we go into the programming state. So we press P, we enter the initial password, which is 0911. And then we hit enter. Okay, so when the display says S, that means that it's in programming state. So I want to enter the first phone number that this should call. I'm just reading this manual. Operation. So I press E1. I'm not sure what E stands for. That's an interesting question. Okay. Start store number when the enter input in. If 0 is displayed. Okay, I think I just enter a number and then press enter. So let's just put in our first phone number, which is going to be the blue Conair phone. This is hooked up to just like an internal VoIP system that I have, so it's just going to be 3-digit extensions. Hopefully that doesn't become annoying. That's going to be 212, enter. Okay, and it displayed 0, so I think that means we're good. Let's save a second number because I think it's just telling us that operation for save, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth group number is the same with the first. So I think we can just hit E2. Let's have the second number be the Merlin. So that's just another 3-digit extension. Looks like we saved that one too. We can also inquire the numbers saved, and I'm a little curious about how this will look just because of the fact that it only has the single-digit display. So under programming state, S displayed, pulse 3, C will display, means check, and then pulse E1, E2, E3. So let's press E1. Yeah, so it just shows the number to us 1 digit at a time. That's fine. I'm pretty happy with how this works so far. So we've got 2 contacts in there. I'm going to add a 3 just for fun. And the third is going to be, I'm just realizing nothing is actually hooked up the way I thought it was. So I'm probably just going to swap around the phone cables to this ATA over here that most of this stuff is hooked up to. I'm going to make the third contact 213. And we're going to make that be this loud. This is a mechanical loud ringer. Good if you just want your phone to be a little bit scarier sounding. Give me just a minute. I'm just going to swap around the cables to make things match how I thought things were hooked up. Now, an interesting question that comes up is how we hook this up, because let's talk about that just a little bit. 2 green color wires, telephone line output to connect with telephone, positive and negative are same. If you just read that, you might think that the green wires should go to the phone line. But 2 blue color wire as telephone line, external line input, positive and negative are same. The way they're using input and output here is a little weird, but they specifically say telephone line external for green. So I'm pretty sure the green is supposed to go to the central office phone line. That raises the question of what the blue is. This is one of the reasons I got out some extra phones, because if have I mentioned this before somewhere? I don't know. For burglar alarms, there is often this special kind of phone jack. It's a special kind of registered jack, and it's called, I bet I'm going to get this wrong because I forgot to just check it, but it's called, I believe, an RJ48X or registered jack 48X. The 48X, it takes a standard 6P4C wall cord, but instead of having contacts 2, 3, 4, and 5 as phone lines 1 and 2, 1 in the middle, 2 on the outside, it's wired differently. Contacts 2, 3, 4, and 5, the middle two, I don't think I'm going to get this backwards, the middle two are the central office line, and the outer two are the inside wiring of the building's phone system. Normally, when nothing is plugged in, there are these little like spring-loaded contacts in there that short the inner contacts and the outer contacts together, so that the RJ48 jack just becomes a pass-through. It just connects the CO line to the inside phone wiring. But when you plug a connector in, it actually disconnects them from each other, and then they go separately up the cord. The reason for that is that it allows you to plug in a burglar alarm, and the burglar alarm is now able to seize or basically override the line. So normally the burglar alarm will use a relay to leave the inside wiring connected to the outside wiring. But if the alarm goes off, let's say like a smoke detector is triggered, you don't want to fail to sound the alarm just because a chatty teenager is on the phone the whole time. So the RJ48X allows the burglar alarm to throw that relay, disconnecting the inside wiring from the outside wiring, which from the CO perspective will cause, and I think it just left programming mode because it timed out, which is good, that's smart. The burglar alarm can disconnect the wiring. That means that the line appears to go back on hook from the CO perspective. Now the burglar alarm can take it off hook and dial its own call. So it basically lets the burglar alarm, hang up the phone for you if someone is using the line. That creates some confusion sometimes because people will plug a normal phone into an RJ48X, and then now that's the only phone that works because it doesn't correctly short the inside to the outside wiring. Or just that little shorting bar will go bad, like the spring will fail or it'll corrode, and now all your phones become sketchy. It's not a perfect system. But I'm guessing that the reason that this has two phone lines is because it's set up that way. I think that we can hook up a phone through this thing. Normally the phone will work fine, but if this device wants to place a call, then it'll disconnect the phone. We'll try that out. But first, let's just try the basics. I have plugged this in. Let's just follow the instructions. We've programmed in 3 numbers. What happens if I push one of these when it's not in programming mode? Nothing appears to be the answer. Interesting. So, save and play alarm voice. Tiger 911 can save 20 seconds voice record. Under programming state, S displayed. So let's just get back into that. Okay, now we're in programming state. Pulse 1. Okay, the R means record, so we are now recording. Help, emergency. There's 12 volts on the input, and I don't know what that means. Finish record and stop automatically when time is over. Can I not stop it? What happens if I hit enter?
Okay, the R
Aha.
record, so we are now recording. Help, emergency. There's 12 volts on the input, and I don't know what that means. Finish record and stop automatically when time is over. Can I not stop it? What happens if I hit enter?
Okay, now, I mean, it's the manual doesn't say that, but it seems like enter stops recording. And that sounds fine, just out of the internal speaker. So I've got some options that I can set about how it actually, calls out. Option A, after triggering, circling, dialing 1 to 9 times to the saved E1 to E4 numbers and then automatically stop. Initial setting is 5 turns. Press 6, 1. Choose circling times. Let's just set it to 2 so that it's easier to demo this without waiting forever. And then enter. Okay, so I think what it's set to do now is to call each of the program numbers in order and then give up after 2 times. We have other options. Option B, after triggering, circling, dialing, unstop following E1 to E4 sequence until triggering signal reset to original state and stop automatically. So I think that means it's going to dial over and over and over until there's no longer an input. Option C, after triggering, circling, dialing persistently following E1 to E8 sequence until stop by inputting password, Operation 6-3 enter. We're going to try that out because I don't know. I'm curious if you can enter the password from the phone that it's calling or if it has to be done from the local keypad, right? Option 6, triggering method. 3 selectable triggering method under programming state S operate as following. A, set as 12 VDC voltage trigger factory default. Operation 4-1 enter. Set as NO trigger. Operation 4-2 enter. Set as NC trigger. Operation 4-3 enter. And this is where I'm really just not sure what that means. Triggering signal length. Set triggering signal length. So what this does, you can set a number of seconds. It's basically like a debounce, I guess. You can set it so that it has to be from half a second to 9 seconds of the signal before it starts calling out. Factory default is a half a second. I think that is fine. There's changing the password. I'm literally not going to do that just so I don't forget what I set it to. One last little thing that I want to point out just before we try it out. The firmware of Voice Dialer can be upgraded through PC software. Pulse 9, display F, then Pulse 8, display blinking. It's funny, it's Chinese character, but it's just 3 horizontal strokes, so I think they just mean the 3. Sort of funny that they do that. Means entered firmware upgrade mode. Please use data cable, connect with PC, use PC software to upgrade firmware, and after finished upgradation, please reboot the Voice Dialer. I do not know where that cable connects. We'll open it up later. Maybe there's a header on the board for that. Okay, are you ready for the big moment? This is, it's set to voltage trigger, which is the default. Maybe if I planned ahead more, would have made like a cool box with a button or something. I didn't, so we're just going to do this. You know what? Here's the thing. It has to be sustained for testing. Hold on. This will make it easier. Okay, here we go. Okay, I heard a relay click in there, which was probably it seizing the line. It's showing a box. Let's try this. I might be interpreting the manual about the green and blue wrong. Let's just try hooking it up the other way with the blue to the central office. Let's see if it does anything different now. Real promising start. Ooh! Okay, that was it. I had the wires the wrong way around. I'm just going to let this ring for the moment, because I'm just curious what's going to happen. I don't think any of these will go to voicemail. I don't think any of them have voicemail configured in the asterisk, soft switch. Yeah, so this has stopped ringing. Does that mean it's going to move on to the next contact? Okay, so I'm probably going to edit most of that out because it was just a bunch of me fiddling and then the camera died. But I triggered it, called this phone. You probably saw that. Okay, so here's the thing. And I'm just doing that to reset it to see if that'll make that stop ringing. Yeah, I think it hung up. I thought that something wasn't working right because it called this phone, and if I didn't answer this phone, then nothing else happened. And I was fiddling around, and then I was like looking at how things were configured because I had this really confusing experience where I called from this phone to this phone, and then that phone started ringing, and I was like, "What's there are gremlins in the soft switch." Here's the thing. It is working. It does call the second phone number. I had accidentally not reset it. It just takes it a very long time. I think maybe it takes it like 2 minutes to go from the first phone to calling the second phone, which is odd, right? I don't like that. If you were using this in, obviously you should not use this in like a life safety situation, but even just for like property protection, I mean, I guess nothing's going to get that much worse in 2 minutes. It just seems weird. My guess is that that's happening because it does not do anything to detect whether or not someone is picked up. It just allows like a 2 minute timeout, which in a way makes sense because if people have voicemail, I made a point of like none of these phones have voicemail. If people have voicemail, it really complicates detecting whether or not they answered because you can't use the end of ringing anymore. Like commercial outbound calling systems often have like heuristics to try to detect whether it's a voicemail that answered or a human. And sometimes I think that's as dumb as like finding out whether or not it beeps because, people don't usually beep when you call them. And I guess they just decided they weren't going to deal with that at all because I was wondering how they handled that. The answer is they didn't. I think it just calls the number, plays the recording in a loop for 2 minutes, then it stops, goes back on hook, goes back off hook and calls the next number, and it has no idea if anyone answered. So for the sake of demonstration, let's go ahead and change its first contact to this phone. The reason I'm doing that is because this has a speaker, and that way you will be able to hear it without having to wait. Okay, let's exit programming mode, and we're going to trigger the alarm. You got to be a little bit patient, even on the first number, but I think it's going to work this time. There we go. And we're just going to answer with the speaker. So, perfect. You can tell that it's playing the recording. And if we wait, so you'll see it's just looping. That's all it's doing. It doesn't sound very good. Is that just because... If it was just because of this, I would think it would be audible crackling when I mess with them, but it's not. It's interesting because this sounds a lot worse than how I thought it sounded just coming out of the speaker. Now, you'll remember I wondered, can we reset it from a phone? Nope. This button's a little sticky. This is an old phone. I don't think it has. Oh, and it just hung up. This goes to busy when the other party hangs up because the Merlin does not have disconnect supervision working. And if you don't know what any of that meant, I'm sorry, I don't think it's worth explaining here. It's calling again. That's funny. It's looping. It's only got one phone number, so it's just going to call the same phone over and over again. But I set it to loop 2 times, so I think it won't call again after this. So let's reset it. So you can't reset it from the phone it calls, you can only reset it from the keypad. That's interesting. That seems really annoying. I'm not sure that I would be happy with that if I was going to actually use this. Because now you are going to have to, like, if it's in any mode other than the one where it calls a limited number of times, you're going to have to go drive to where it is to reset it. And even if it only calls a limited number of times, that's annoying, right? You got to wait while it calls you like 5 times before it stops. So that's basic functionality. There's a couple other things that I am wondering about. One is that the sensophone, which I don't have one now, but I used to have an older sensophone, so I'm a little familiar with how those work, has a feature where you can actually like talk through it, basically. And they mainly advertise that so that you can hear the surrounding audio. A lot of like kind of burglar alarm adjacent devices had that. I think just because it was cheap to add. There's even some like automotive GPS trackers, like older ones, that had a microphone and a deal where if you called them, because they were cellular, you could hear the microphone audio. I actually thought that it made more sense with the sensophone than usual, because potentially if you had an audible alarm on something, like a smoke detector or something like that, you would be able to hear that. Yeah, kind of, I don't know, I can sort of make up a reason that would be handy. As far as I can tell, this doesn't have that. Manual says nothing about it. Obviously, when it calls and you answer, it's just playing the recording over and over. I want to see if I can figure out what's up with this NO or NC thing. So let's go into programming mode. I'm starting to get good at using this, right? And how did we change triggering method? Set is NO trigger operation 4 to enter. Okay. So now it's set to trigger on a normally open. So let's say now it's in NC or NO mode. And let's say nothing. This should be normally open, right? So if I'm right that they're just saying, oh, you can wire an external dry contact between its power supply, this should trigger it. Let's just to be sure, let's go back into programming mode. Let's change it to normally closed. And that would seem like it should cause it to immediately go into alarm if that's not hooked up, right? That's 4-3, enter. E. I assume that means error. But that time it seems to have worked. And I hit 4-3. Maybe I should do a video review here. Did I hit the wrong buttons or something? I don't know. Now it should be in normally closed. What happens if I apply 12 volts? I don't know. I think this is bolstering my theory that there's a different version that has 2 wires, and that this just doesn't have those wires hooked up. Right, so one thing I wanted to find out is if the other phone line works the way I expect. If it's a way to have it seize the line, even if the line is in use. We are going to plug the Conair phone in through this device. Let's find out. If I pick this up, obviously I should be doing this with a speakerphone, right? And I'll tell you, here's a funny thing. I don't have just an analog. I'm honestly, for like being a phone dweeb, I'm not really that interested in just traditional analog phones. So all the stuff that I have is digital. Not necessarily VoIP, like I've got this system, which I would say is only semi-digital. This is analog voice with a digital control channel. But I actually, like, this is the only phone that I own that's just a plain phone. And I picked this up at a thrift store, like, on my way to give a presentation on something, because I realized I needed a way to demonstrate. Good thrift store find though. This is a very handsome phone. I love the color. I love the huge keypad on it. And I would record this, but the recording, jig that I have, I got to use with my other phones, and it goes on the handset cord, like most of these do. But this is an interesting phone thing. It's got the keypad in the handset. Most of the time, when the keypad is in the handset, that means that the handset is the whole phone. All of the electronics are in here. What do I mean by that? Well, your traditional phone has 2 wires going in, and then from the base to the handset, there's 4 wires. That's because the hybrid transformer that does the conversion from 2 pairs, one for talk, one for listen, to a single pair with both on it, which if you think about it, is kind of a feat of electrical magic, right? The hybrid transformer is what does that, and it's in the base. So the connection from the base to the handset has a talk pair and a listen pair, and this assumes that it works that way. This does not. If you look in here, you're never going to be able to see this. You're going to have to take my word for it. But there's only 2 contacts populated. The straight 1 pair phone line goes into the handset on this phone, and that is typical of phones where the dial pad is in the handset. It's funny because it's a 4P connector, just like line cords usually are, but it only uses the 2 middle contacts. Why they chose to use a 4P connector instead of using a 6P connector, like a normal wall cord, when this is, in practice, a wall cord, I don't know. I think it's just because coily cords are only really made with the 4P connectors. So if this came with a 6P and you lost the handset cord, it would be annoying to replace. I think that's the whole reason. You might wonder how the ringer works, because the ringer is in the base. This ringer, this loud ringer, you can plug a phone into. Exact same deal, right? This base is essentially just an accessory loud ringer, and that's all it really does. Everything else is in the handset. Lengthy explanation of why I don't have the right things to record this. So, sorry this will be a little bit of a lame check. I'm just going to tell you what's happening. You might be able to hear if I just put this up to my lapel mic. We have dial tone. I'm going to make a call to the Merlin. And I can put myself, I don't think this will feedback, but it will sound bad and annoying. But obviously, currently I am on a phone call through the Tiger 911. Now let's put it into alarm. Aha! It hung up my phone call. You might wonder why Windows XP installer music. It's just a configuration thing that I have going on. This got put on hold. But you'll see it's ringing now. So that works how you would expect. And currently, yeah, there's no dial tone on this phone. Okay, let's take a look at how this thing is actually put together. Cheaply is the first answer. This back panel it's just clipped in, and it's not clipped in very well. I have a feeling that if you screwed this to the wall through the back panel, like they want you to, you would occasionally knock it off just by accident. So you can see there's just a simple board in here, and it's just held down. I need to... Now, believe me, these screws are cheap. The heads are like kind of starting to strip a bit from, just from having taken them out. Well, I only loosened them, actually. I think this is the first time I've really taken them out. So, let's see. All these wires go to this connector, and it's labeled, which is nice. Internal, external, positive, minus, T in. That's probably trigger in. So I don't see anywhere, it's not like this has the connectors for a dry contact, and they're just not, like, used. It's got these nice connectors out to the microphone and speaker. That seems like fine work. It's a little cheap how those are installed, but it seems good enough. You'll notice that this case obviously is the same for the 8 phone number version because it's got the holes. Super cheap keypad, right? Just holes in the plastic, sticker on the front, and then, I mean, honestly, I kind of love the aesthetic of this board. Just the grid with the 7 segment. This is a pretty handsome board. If this was some kind of device someone rigged up, I would admire their design sensibilities. And really, this is a device someone rigged up, so props to whoever put this together. TG911 ER3.2Y3.1. It's got a serial number. This button on the back, you might think is a tamper switch, but it is not. It's actually a reset button, and you can use that if you forget the password. There is an unpopulated connector here, VGCDR, and they're labeled J2 and J1. The bottom one is labeled VRTG for the pins. What are those? VGCDR. Those don't mean anything to me. Maybe they'll mean something to you. Maybe this is for flashing. This might be how you would do a firmware update, because there's no like unused connectors on here. Is there something under the sticker? No. So I don't know how you would do the firmware update. Let's check out like what's on the board. This is a relay, and this is going to be that line seizure relay. Like a relay is just by far the simplest way to implement that. And I suspect the way they've done this is also the hook switch relay. Like, I don't know, no reason to complicate it, right, with doing something separate. I think this is going to be the controller. I'm not going to get you close enough in to see what that says. I can't even see what that says. Man, my vision is not as good as it once was. HT32F52241. I don't know. I think that's about what there is to see. Like, there's really not that much to this. The buttons are most of it, frankly. They're all labeled, too, with what they do. E1, E2, E3. That's very nice. I feel like whoever designed this board did a pretty nice job of it. Everything is really clearly labeled, which I like. Well, that's it for the Tiger 911. It's not like the most interesting thing in the world, but I'm pretty happy with it. I don't think it disappointed for something I bought just to see how well it works. I mean, honestly, it works pretty good. Like, I guess if I'm gonna do this, like, review series of cheap imported burglary adjacent devices, I should probably end them with would I use this myself? Well, the obvious answer is no. I don't have a landline phone connection. I think CenturyLink advertises one to me at $35 a month, which seems like a lot. I have a feeling that if I looked at the tariff and then called them, I could probably order cheaper service for maybe like $15 a month. There's this thing that goes on with the phone companies where often what they advertise is kind of a premium service with a lot of add-ons, but it's not the cheapest tariffed rate. So if you take a look at the tariff, figure out the tariff being the like legal definition of their service plans because telephone companies are regulated. If you take a look at the tariff and then figure out like what their basic residential service is, often that's cheaper than what they advertise, but you do basically have to call them and ask for that service by its tariffed name because it's not something they're in the habit of selling. They want to sell their more premium services. But the thing is, my house doesn't have inside phone wiring. It used to, but the previous owner, when they renovated it, they literally just cut it off where all the wall jacks used to be, which honestly I find pretty annoying. I wish they hadn't done that. They could have just left it more intact in the wall if they wanted to sheetrock over it. And they didn't. They cut it and then they put blank plate. What an annoying thing to do. But it would be a lot of effort for me to have a landline phone service here. And running this kind of thing over IP just like adds so many more, over VoIP I should say, just adds so many more failure points compared to just using a straight IP device. And just for reliability reasons, I'd want to use cellular anyway, right? With LTE, Cat 1, and NB-IoT, there's really inexpensive options now to have cellular service for this kind of device. I have multiple SIM cards via hologram. They're like dirt cheap, you know? So I don't think this kind of thing is super relevant in the modern world. But let's say I had the situation where I had a landline phone, maybe some sort of remote property where I wanted to manage something. I don't think I would use this specifically because you cannot reset it over the phone. That is too annoying. I think in the remote property like use case, you would have to set it to mode 1 where it stops calling after a while, and then it would be so annoying when it calls you and you answer on the first ring, and then it calls you again, and then it calls you again, and you just have to like wait for it to stop looping. Because of the way this calls out, it would leave a voicemail, so it's not too big of a deal. You could just set it to only call each number once, but I don't know, that's a pretty serious limitation. That said, within the like kind of the limitations of the feature set of this device, I think it's fairly well made. Everything works the way the manual says it will. The manual is a little hard to interpret at times, but I haven't noticed anything in the manual that is straight up wrong, with the exception that I am pretty sure that this is just a variant of this device. This is a SKU that does not have dry contact support. The manual specifically mentions that there's a 4 phone number and an 8 phone number version. It does not mention that there are versions with and without dry contact support. So that could certainly be clarified, but it's not really a problem with the device, right? It's more of just an issue with the marketing. I'm going to give the Tiger 911 4 out of 5 stars in my arbitrary ranking system that I have just invented. And in a minute, I'm going to put this back together, and I might hold on to it and just see if I can come up with something interesting to use it for. And then in about 3 months, I'll go through my shed and I'll throw it away because I won't have found anything interesting to use it for. And that is the eternal life cycle of someone like me. And stop alarm dialing will automatically alarm to the preset numbers when triggered. If user wants to stop alarm dialing, input private code while box displayed. Suppose code is 1234. 1234 will be displayed after input. If code is correct, alarm will be withdrawn after hear do sounds. For example, code is 1234, operation steps, after box displayed pulse 1234. Withdraw alarm must input 4-digit correct password. Incorrect password fail to withdraw alarm. Input correct password again. Can withdraw alarm. Please pay attention. Withdraw control host alarm system alarm and then input private code to remove Autodialer alarm while try to stop Autodialer 911 dialing.